So, welcome to part three. And you can find most of this written from Genesis, I think about 20, all the way up to 31, 32, Genesis chapter 20, that is. And you can read it all through the end of Genesis. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating stuff. Family feuds. So, where were we? Jacob flees from his, from home. His mom sends him to Padan Aram, which is where she was from, so that he can escape his brother's wrath. His brother that he has managed to cheat out of his inheritance. So anyway, he gets there, meets Rachel, first, his uncle's daughter, second daughter, and a younger daughter, and falls in love with her because she's very beautiful. Then she had an older sister called Leah who wasn't that pretty. So anyway, and he met her at the well when he got to Padan Aram, and she took him to her father, and that's he met Rachel, and Rachel took him to her father and said, "Oh, this is Jacob, Auntie Rebecca's son, your nephew." And Laban is all excited, welcomes him. It records there that Jacob told him all that had happened to him. So I believe that Jacob told him how he deceived his brother and everything. Now, Laban was, instead of saying to Jacob, "Oh, wow, I hope you've learned your lesson. It's always good to do." You know what he told him? He said, "You're really my flesh and blood." The first time I read, I've never hit me before, but I just realized Laban was a very crafty fellow. Meets this guy who is his nephew, and he's like, okay, so you're truly one of us. You're very crafty, like me. That's how I read it anyway. But it's very interesting. And so Jacob decided to live there and worked with Laban. After a month, Laban says to him, "You shouldn't be working with me for free, even if you're family. Name your wages." And Laban and Jacob, because he's so in love with Rachel, says, I'll work for you for 7 years for Rachel's hand in marriage." And Laban is like, "Yeah, sure, And a guy working for you for 7 years, that one now hot love, So may we all find men who love us that way. May we be worthy of it. So anyway, so he does this work for 7 years, works for Laban for 7 years. And I think through those 7 years, later on we'll find out Laban was being crafty with him, changing his, doing certain things. But anyway, works with him for 7 years. And when 7 years are up, he goes to Laban and says, "Oh yeah, I've done my 7 years. Give me my wife." Guess what Laban does? He does a bride switch. And of course, in those days they were veiled, so he couldn't have seen that it wasn't Rachel. He gives Jacob Rachel's older sister Leah, who wasn't so pretty, as we remember. It's so funny how the Bible says she had weak eyes, So it may have been she was cross-eyed, but she wasn't. She wasn't that great looking. And it's at night. Jacob goes in there, claims his bride, sleeps with his bride, wakes up in the morning, and lo and behold, who's lying beside him? Not Rachel. And so he's really upset and went to Laban and says, "Oh, why did you do this to me? You deceived me, blah, blah, blah." Now think about it. Payback is not so exciting, is it, when you're on the receiving end? In the same vein, in the same way he deceived his brother, and he was asking now his uncle who had deceived him, "Why did you deceive me?" See, that's why Jesus says, "Do unto others as you will have them do unto you." Because we can do things for our selfish interest, but when somebody else does it to us. So it's always important in our relationships. Think through this thing I'm doing. If someone else did it to me, how would I feel? We see this in relationships all the time. If you're cheating on your wife or your spouse or your girlfriend, or you're lying, or you're beating them up when they're defenseless, that's what Jesus says. And that's why Jesus' word and laws on relationships are so beautiful, because everything else emanates from this. Love the Lord your God. But number two, love your neighbor as yourself. So whatever we're doing, think, how would I feel if this was done to me? Try and walk in other people's shoes. And so Jacob got firsthand how it feels to be deceived by people you trust and you love. So anyway, He loves Rachel, and he decides that, you know what, I'm going to work for her for 7 more years. Because Laban said, well, if you want Rachel, you're going to have to work for her for 7 more years. I'll say one more thing about family and relationships. Laban himself, I'm sorry, he was not a great father. Whether it was their culture, whether it was their traditional, he actually was just pawning off these girls, and using them to get this guy to work for him and to try and increase his wealth and increase his whatever, which didn't work in the long run, by the way, as we shall see. But what is interesting is that, the girls, yes, it's tradition, it's culture, but they resented him for it, because we will see later on what happened. But they saw him as selling them to Jacob. Now, today we have girls' rights. There's a lot of work to ensure that girls are not given out in marriage in the way that we do child marriage, or they're not treated like chattel, or women are not treated like chattel. So you see, a lot has not changed even from then. And when people talk about it, it's like, oh, you people, you feminists, you're liberating. How would you feel if that's how you were treated? If you were a man and you were being traded in these things, we see slave trade, we saw what was happening, and this was what this guy was doing to his daughter. So, fathers, we also have to be very, very careful. We still see it happening in political families. We see it happening all over the place, where people trade their daughters for favors, or in some cases, they're not even giving them in marriage, they pimp them. We see it. And it's something God does not like. We'll see later, but you'll see the effects. So when the daughters grow to resent their families and resent their parents and resent their fathers, these things come from all of these things. But anyway, back to the story. So Laban now, he has him work 7 more years for Rachel. And Jacob, bless his heart, loved her so much. He worked for 7 more years for Rachel. So imagine 14 years to get this woman that he loved. And he got her and he married her. So now he has two wives, not necessarily his choice. And also at the same time, I wonder what would have happened if he had consulted God when Laban told him and said, you have to work 7 more years. I wonder what God would have told him. And maybe if he had consulted God and God had told him something, maybe the story might have been different, or maybe not. But again, remember, no matter what happened, with even the mistakes, even the injustices that were visited upon Jacob by Laban, God still achieved and accomplished his purposes by bringing about a great nation. So no matter what is happening, no matter what injustices are being done to you, in our country there's a lot of injustice. Let us not despair. Let us continue to work in righteousness, do the right thing, because God will still accomplish his purpose. That he has said he's going to do. He said he's going to give us justice in the long run. It will come to pass. And let us see how, out of even this well of deceit, this web of lies and treachery and all of these things, God still brought about a great nation from Jacob. Catch you later.